Welcome. You are joining us today for a comprehensive, minute-by-minute analysis of one of Germany's most perplexing modern mysteries.
Right, and it's a case that really forces us to examine the very fabric of our digital lives.
Exactly. We are tracing the timeline of a disappearance, starting from the subject's biographical background right up to the present day. We intend to leave absolutely no stone unturned in the official case files and the investigative reports.
Because missing persons cases, they are essentially massive puzzles. Every single digital footprint, every witness statement, and every family dynamic is a critical piece of that puzzle.
And the sheer volume of public tips in this case is staggering, right? Over 3,000 to date.
Yes, over 3,000, which makes this one of the most high-profile investigations in the country's recent history. It's a somber reality to navigate, especially when analyzing the raw data.
So let's establish exactly who the subject of this investigation was before the morning of February 18, 2019.
That's the necessary starting point. You have to establish a behavioral baseline.
Right. So Rebecca Reusch was born on September 21st, 2003, in Berlin, Germany.
A native of the city.
Yes. Her parents are Brigitte and Bernd Reusch. And the family dynamic is really important here. She was the youngest of three sisters.
And by that point, her older sisters, Jessica and Vivian, had already moved out. They had their own partners and young children.
Exactly. So Rebecca lived at home with her parents in Britz, which is a locality in the Berlin borough of Neukölln.
I want to pause on the geography there because Neukölln and Britz, well, they provide a very specific context for her daily movements.
How so?
Well, Neukölln as a whole is quite massive. It's diverse, heavily populated, very urban. But Britz itself has a noticeably different character.
It's more residential, right?
Exactly. It's decidedly more suburban. You see a lot of single-family homes, quieter streets. The community framework is much more localized.
Which means her movement patterns would be fairly predictable.
Precisely. In investigative profiling, you look for predictable nodes of movement. Because her older sisters lived so close by and she visited them frequently to see her nieces and nephews, her physical world was structured around these very secure, interconnected family environments.
So she wasn't just wandering through chaotic urban centers.
No, not at all. She was moving between safe harbors. Therefore, any deviation from that tight familial transit loop, it immediately registers as a severe behavioral anomaly.
That makes perfect sense. Now, she was a 10th grade student at the Walter Gropius Schule in nearby Gropiusstadt.
A standard educational routine.
Yes. And her personal life was described as fairly typical. She was not in a committed relationship. But there is one detail that is heavily emphasized in the files.
The music group.
Right. She was a massive fan of the Korean music group BTS. And, how can a teenager's specific interest in a pop group actually shape a police investigation?
It's actually a foundational piece of intelligence for modern investigators. Teenage fandoms today, specifically groups like the BTS or MANY, they operate almost entirely digitally.
They aren't just buying CDs and putting up posters.
Exactly. A fan's life in that subculture is heavily rooted in online communities. They have coordinated streaming events, scheduled international releases, and constant interactions on platforms like Discord or specialized apps.
So it generates a massive amount of data.
An incredible amount. Her digital existence is continuous. She's receiving notifications, reacting to media, engaging with peers from the moment she wakes up. Understanding that is crucial.
Because it creates an expected digital baseline.
Right. This digital existence will become the absolute focal point later in the timeline because a sudden cessation of that activity is highly alarming.
That leads us directly into the timeline, because her tight-knit family bond is exactly why her whereabouts on the evening of Sunday, February 17, 2019, were completely ordinary.
It was a very standard scenario.
Right. She is at her eldest sister's house south of Britz. The sister is home alone with her young daughter.
Because the sister's husband is out.
Yes. The brother-in-law is out at a party with colleagues. Rebecca's plan is simple. She's going to sleep on the living room couch and go to school the next day.
And she had an unscheduled late start for school that Monday, which is why she was sleeping on the couch instead of going home.
Exactly. So let's trace this minute by minute, because the morning of February 18 is where everything unravels.
The timeline here is extremely rigid.
At 5:45 in the morning, the brother-in-law returns from the party and goes to bed.
Establishing his physical presence in the house.
Right. Then, at 07:00, the sister leaves with her daughter for work.
Which logically leaves only Rebecca and the brother-in-law in the residence.
Yes. Now, sometime between 07.000 and 07.46, Rebecca sends a Snapchat photo to a friend.
This is a critical piece of digital evidence,
Then at 07.15, her mother calls her phone and goes straight to voicemail.
indicating the phone is either off, out of battery, or disconnected from the cellular network.
Exactly. And then, at 07.46, Rebecca's phone logs into the home network for the final time.
That network ping at 07.46 is the absolute fulcrum of this case.
And it gets more complicated.
Yeah.
At 08.15, the friend actually opens the Snapchat photo that Rebecca sent earlier.
Right.
At 08.25, the mother calls again. It goes to voicemail again.
And the final piece of that morning timeline is 09.40.
Yes, 09.40, when Rebecca fails to arrive at school.
So we have a total cessation of activity after 07.46.
I really need to push back on that Snapchat photo detail, though. The files say she sent it between 07.00 and 07.46.
Right.
Why don't investigators know the exact time it was captured? If they know exactly when the friend opened it at 08.15, shouldn't there be a timestamp for the capture?
It's an incredibly frustrating aspect of ephemeral messaging apps for law enforcement. You have to understand how applications like Snapchat handle data.
They are designed to delete it, right?
Precisely. They are engineered for rapid data destruction. When a user captures a photo, the app encrypts it, uploads it to a central server, and sends a notification to the recipient.
So the metadata exists on the server.
Temporarily. The metadata, including the capture timestamp, is embedded in that encrypted file. But the moment the friend opens the photo at 08.15, the app's protocol executes.
It purges the file.
Yes. It wipes it from the recipient's local cache and signals the central server to delete it. The operating system logs that the app was opened at 08.15, but that original capture time is completely vaporized.
Wow. So without physically having Rebecca's phone?
You can't extract the original flash memory data.
Exactly. So investigators are left with a 46-minute variable window.
That is deeply concerning. But that Snapchat photo did provide one crucial thing. The friend remembered what she was wearing.
Which helps establish the missing inventory.
Right. The items missing from the house included the clothes she wore in the photo. A BTS hoodie with Rap Monster on the back.
A pink plush jacket.
Yes, ripped jeans and black and white Vans sneakers. Also missing were her Vans backpack, a pink handbag, an MK purse, her phone, and a pink Fuji Instax Mini 9 camera.
If you look at that list, it looks like a standard bag packed for school or hanging out with friends. A go bag, essentially.
Yes. But there's one massive anomaly in the inventory.
The blanket. A large purple blanket from the sister's house was also missing.
And that completely shatters the routine departure hypothesis.
I mean, if she was just going to school, why take a large household blanket?
In psychological profiling of crime scenes, missing items indicate intent. The backpack, the camera, the purse, those all suggest a voluntary exit for a normal day.
Right. Teenagers carry those things.
Exactly. But a large domestic blanket is unwieldy. It serves absolutely no practical purpose in a classroom.
So how do investigators reconcile that?
They are forced to construct much darker hypotheses. If her departure was voluntary, the blanket implies an outdoor, non-school activity. But if the departure was not voluntary, the blanket's function changes entirely.
It becomes a tool for concealment.
Yes. It suggests an attempt by a third party to transport something or someone out of the residence without attracting visual attention.
That is a terrifying operational pivot for the investigators. And with her failing to return home, the family reported her missing on February 18th.
The very same day.
Right, but the escalation is what really stands out here. By February 21, she is officially declared missing. And by February 23, the case is handed over to the homicide squad.
Just 5 days.
Exactly. 5 days from a missing teen report to a homicide investigation. What triggers that kind of rapid shift?
Law enforcement relies on very strict behavioral criteria. They don't escalate based on gut feelings. They look at risk indicators.
And the digital silence is the primary one.
Yes. A standard runaway usually leaves a digital trail. A new IP login, a burner phone, a social media check-in. The complete vacuum of data after 007.46 is a massive red flag.
And the location matters too, right?
Crucially, her last known location wasn't a crowded train station. It was a highly controlled, private family home. Combine that secure environment, the total digital silence, and the bizarre missing inventory, like the blanket.
The probability of her just running away drops to zero.
Exactly. The protocol mandates immediate escalation to secure forensic resources before the scene degrades.
Which immediately put an intense focus on the brother-in-law. Because As we'd established, he was the only person known to be in the house with her after 07.00.
The geography of the timeline points directly at him.
He was arrested on February 28, then released on March 1st. He was arrested again on March 4 and released on March 22.
The police were very clear about their stance.
Yes, they stated they firmly believed Rebecca never left the house alive. And this belief was anchored by a massive contradiction in his digital alibi.
The destruction of his alibi is a significant piece of modern forensic work.
He originally claimed he was sleeping during that critical early morning window.
Right, which would mean he had no knowledge of her movements.
But a data request to Google completely contradicted that.
It did. The log showed his mobile device was actively in use. He wasn't asleep.
He was awake, and he was searching for highly disturbing, violent adult material.
Now, this data request is a fascinating procedural point because it highlights the friction of modern investigations.
I'm glad you brought that up, because the files show the Google data request was made in 2020, but not fulfilled until 2021.
Right.
Why does it take a full year to get a search history in a high-profile homicide case?
It's due to international data privacy laws. Local police can get a physical search warrant for a house in Berlin in a matter of hours.
Right, they just go to a local judge.
Exactly. But digital data is borderless. Global tech companies usually host European user data in massive server farms in places like Dublin.
So German police can't just demand it from Ireland?
No, they have to use mutual legal assistance treaties, or MLATs.
How does that process work?
It's an agonizing bureaucratic labyrinth. The German authorities have to prove dual criminality, meaning the crime is recognized in both countries.
I see.
The request is translated, passed through diplomatic channels to the Irish Department of Justice, reviewed by foreign magistrates, and then finally served to the tech company's legal team.
So it's layers upon layers of legal review.
Yes, which is precisely why it took a year. But once they got it, it established a behavioral baseline that was deeply concerning.
Because he was consuming this highly disturbing material during the exact window of time she vanished.
Right. It places him in a state of wakefulness, consuming extreme content in the same isolated environment as a missing teenager. It irrevocably damages his credibility.
And it forces police to look very closely at his physical movements. Which brings us to the A12 motorway data.
The ANPR data, automatic number plate recognition.
Yes. Cameras spotted his pink Renault Twingo on the A12 motorway heading toward Frankfurt into Oder.
Heading east toward Poland.
Right. It was spotted on the morning of February 18th, the day she vanished, and again on the evening of February 19th.
Which is a massive physical anomaly.
Exactly. How does ANPR actually work to confirm this? Is this foolproof?
It's highly precise. These systems use infrared illumination and optical character recognition. When a car passes at high speed, the system isolates the license plate, converts it to text, and logs the timestamp and direction.
So there's no debating that his specific car was on that road.
Exactly. And given that he had no logical, previously stated reason for those journeys, right after his alibi collapsed, it strongly implies the transportation of something away from the primary scene.
Yet, despite this mountain of circumstantial evidence, the family's reaction was to completely defend him.
Which is an incredibly complex psychological dynamic.
The father publicly stated that these trips on the A12 were connected to something else, and the media, supported by statements from the suspect's sister, speculated it involved illicit activities.
Specifically drug trafficking in Poland.
Right. I have to ask, is it common for a family to publicly suggest someone is a drug smuggler just to give them an alibi for a worse accusation?
It is an extreme defense mechanism, but we do see it in complex criminal investigations. Yes. When a family member is cornered by circumstantial evidence of a homicide, presenting an alternative felony is a way to control the narrative.
So they're saying, yes, he lied, but he lied about drugs, not murder.
Exactly. It builds a framework that accounts for the secrecy and the travel without admitting to extreme violence.
But the police have to verify that, right?
Absolutely. They apply forensic accounting, check telecommunications for burner phones, look for known narcotics associates, and if they find zero evidence of a drug network...
the alibi collapses.
Exactly. It collapses under its own weight, leaving the homicide hypothesis as the only logical conclusion.
And the family's defense heavily relies on the idea that Rebecca actually walked out the front door. Which brings us to the alternative theories in the witness statements.
The eyewitness accounts are highly problematic here.
Very. Multiple witnesses claim to have seen her walking near her sister's house in the late morning of February 18th.
Carrying the blanket.
Yes. One witness was adamant they saw her with a blanket. They claimed they remembered it because the ground was wet from rain the day before, so a picnic was impossible.
But the meteorological data tells a different story.
Exactly. Investigators pulled the weather records, and February 17th was completely dry. It's like a corrupted file in the computer. The person accesses the memory, feels it's real, but the data is just wrong.
That analogy is perfect for understanding eyewitness testimony.
How does that false memory get created so vividly?
It's a combination of a source monitoring error and retroactive interference. Memory isn't a video recording, it's reconstructive.
So every time you remember it, you rewrite it.
Exactly. A person sees a random teenager on a mundane morning. Days later, they are bombarded by media images of the missing girl and the specific mention of the purple blanket.
Oh, I see. Their brain merges the two.
Yes. The brain seeks order. It unconsciously injects the blanket into the memory of the random teenager. The detail about the rain is just the brain trying to logically justify why they noticed the blanket.
Wow. So they aren't lying.
Not at all. They genuinely believe their reconstructed reality, which is why forensic data must always supersede human memory.
That became evident again with the bus stop theory. People claimed they saw her on bus 171.
But the camera review disproved that.
Right. Police reviewed the transit camera footage and found zero confirmation.
Public transit in a city like Berlin is highly monitored. The statistical probability of evading every single optical sensor on those routes is practically non-existent.
Another theory that the family pushed hard was the BTS meeting theory.
Tying back to her fandom.
Yes. February 18 is a BTS band member's birthday. The family theorized she left to meet other fans and create content, which would explain taking the camera and the blanket.
It's a logically sound hypothesis on the surface.
But is there any data to support it?
That's the issue. An organized fan gathering requires digital coordination.
Right, they would have to message each other to set a time and place.
Exactly. You'd see traces on Discord, WhatsApp, or social media. If the digital forensic analysis of her devices and cloud accounts yields absolutely zero evidence of planning, the theory lacks structural support.
It remains a theory with no confirmation.
Precisely.
This intense focus on her digital life led to a really disturbing subplot involving an internet acquaintance, a boy her age.
The true crime community's involvement.
Yes. Right after the case went public, this boy deleted all of his social media profiles.
Which, to an amateur sleuth, looks like guilt.
Exactly. Why would an innocent person delete their entire digital footprint like that? The police investigated him and definitively ruled him out.
It's a phenomenon of internet panic.
How so?
When a case reaches this level of national prominence, online mobs immediately start mapping the victim's digital network. They scrutinize every comment and like.
So this teenager suddenly finds himself adjacent to a massive homicide investigation.
Yes. And the deletion of profiles isn't an admission of guilt. It's a desperate protective measure. It's a panic response to shield himself from doxing and harassment by unregulated online communities.
That's a stark reality of modern investigations.
Law enforcement understands this perfectly. They look past the deleted profiles, recover the underlying communications using technical means, establish a physical alibi, and rule the person out based on data, not public hysteria.
And speaking of public hysteria, the media sensation surrounding this case was enormous. It was heavily compared to the Madeleine McCann case.
Hence the 3,000 tips.
Right. And to manage this, on March 6, 2019, the lead investigator, Michael Hoffman, presented the case on the TV show Aktenzeichen XY Ungelöst.
The very prominent program.
Yes. And during the broadcast, they showed mugshots of the brother-in-law. This was heavily criticized by lawyers. What is the strategic value of showing a mugshot of someone who hasn't been charged?
It's a calculated high-risk tactic. The goal is to jolt the collective public memory.
To shake a lead loose.
Exactly. By associating a specific face and the pink Twingo vehicle with the timeline, they hope to dislodge a forgotten observation from a motorist or a gas station attendant.
But the legal ramifications are severe.
Profoundly so. It effectively tries the individual in the court of public opinion, bypassing the presumption of innocence. That's why defense attorneys fight it.
And it must generate a lot of false positives.
It does. Citizens primed by the broadcast start seeing the suspect everywhere, which overwhelms investigative resources. It's a logistical nightmare to sort the viable data from the noise.
That media strategy also involved a massive controversy over the primary photo they used of Rebecca.
The Instagram image.
Yes. Instead of a standard portrait, they used a heavily altered photo from her Instagram. It had a digital beauty filter that altered the geometry of her face, creating what media outlets termed a Lolita look.
It completely distorted her natural features.
Right, and the media criticized the police for using it, saying it would hamper the physical search. Yet those same media outlets endlessly republished it.
It's a deeply hypocritical cycle.
As of 2024, it was still the primary police portrait. Why would law enforcement use a photo that defies human geometry?
It's a philosophical and operational challenge of the 21st century.
Digital identity versus physical reality.
Exactly. Uncomfortably, it might be the most accurate representation of how she presented herself to her peers.
So her friends would recognize the filtered version faster than the real one.
Yes. If a teenager interacts predominantly through software that smooths skin and enlarges eyes, their digital network is wired to recognize that specific aesthetic.
But doesn't that sabotage a stranger looking for her on the street?
That is the exact tension.
Yeah.
For a physical search by strangers, an unfiltered photo is vastly superior. But for an appeal targeted at her digital network, the filtered image might trigger faster recognition.
Plus, they have to use what they have access to.
Right. If the most recent high-resolution images provided by the family are already filtered, police must make a rapid operational decision.
And the media used it to drive clicks.
Absolutely. The highly stylized, nature-fueled engagement, highlighting this unsettling feedback loop between social media, law enforcement, and true crime consumption.
This relentless pressure inevitably caused a fracture between the family and the police.
The family dynamics in these cases are incredibly fragile.
The police expressed frustration over a lack of cooperation, while the family criticized the relentless focus on the brother-in-law.
Joseph Wilfling, a renowned homicide expert, has analyzed this exact dynamic.
What was his assessment?
He noted that this is a historically difficult balancing act. When the prime suspect is embedded in the victim's family, investigators walk an agonizing psychological tightrope.
Because the family is already dealing with unimaginable loss.
Yes, and the police are asking them to accept that the perpetrator is sitting in their own living room.
Which requires them to process a secondary trauma of ultimate betrayal.
Exactly. So their resistance isn't necessarily a conscious obstruction of justice. It's cognitive dissonance. It's a survival mechanism to keep the remaining family unit intact.
They reject the forensic narrative to survive the psychological pressure.
Yes, which leaves investigators alienated from a vital source of background intelligence. It's a tragic conflict between human empathy and objective analysis.
But despite that friction, the investigation continued. The data didn't change.
And the authorities never relented.
Which leads us to the recent developments. In April 2023, 4 years after the disappearance, police searched the brother-in-law's home again.
Returning to the primary scene.
Yes, and they conducted acoustic tests, alongside searching for objects linked to that concerning digital search history. Why test sound in a residential building 4 years later?
Acoustic testing is a highly sophisticated branch of forensic reconstruction.
How does it work?
They apply the laws of physics to test their behavioral theories. Sound waves propagate through drywall, wood framing, and glass in measurable ways.
But the house was empty, except for the two of them. Who were they testing the sound for?
The exterior environment. They use calibrated microphones to measure decibel dampening through the walls. If a theoretical struggle produces 90 decibels and the walls only dampen 30, a 60 decibel anomaly projects into the quiet street.
And if no neighbors reported hearing anything?
Then investigators must adjust their physical model of the event. It corroborates or dismantles narratives using acoustic physics.
And the escalation didn't stop there. In October 2025, there was a massive joint operation.
A profound deployment of federal resources.
Yes, local police coordinated with the Federal Criminal Police Office, the BKA. They searched properties in Tausch and Rieds-Neuendorf in Brandenburg.
Properties belonging to the brother-in-law's grandparents.
Exactly. They used drones, ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, heavy excavators, and over 100 agents.
The BKA's involvement signifies a monumental escalation in actionable intelligence. Local municipalities just don't have that kind of budget.
The authorities firmly reiterated their belief that she never left the house alive, and that these rural locations were used to hide evidence. How exactly do they use drones and radar to find something buried years ago?
It's a layered methodology. First, drones with LiDAR and multispectral imaging map the topography.
Looking for what?
Subtle, unnatural depressions in the earth or variations in vegetation that indicate disturbed soil.
And once they find an anomaly from the air?
They deploy ground-penetrating radar, or GPR. It operates on electromagnetic reflection.
So it sees into the earth without digging.
Yes. It emits high-frequency pulses into the soil. When the pulse hits a subsurface anomaly, a change in soil density, or a buried object, the signal reflects back to the surface antenna.
Like shining a flashlight into muddy water and seeing a shadow.
Exactly. Analysts read the radargram to identify the depth and shape non-invasively.
And then the cadaver dogs come in.
Yes, human remains detection dogs. Their olfactory sensitivity completely eclipses synthetic sensors.
But after so many years, how can they detect anything?
Because of the migration of volatile organic compounds, or VOCs.
What are those?
They are compounds released during decomposition. Through seasonal rain and ground shifts, these VOCs move upward through the soil and vent to the surface in microscopic quantities.
Wow.
A highly trained canine can detect those venting points, even if the source is buried meters deep.
And if the dog alerts on a spot, the GPR also flagged.
Then the heavy excavators conduct a highly controlled forensic exhumation.
So the fact that they deployed all of this to those specific properties means their data models pointed directly to those coordinates.
With extremely high statistical probability, yes.
Synthesizing this entire chronological journey, it's a truly modern investigative paradox.
It is the defining contradiction of the case.
We started with a typical Sunday evening in 2019 and traced a path through a labyrinth of router logs, Snapchat metadata, international server requests, and ANPR highway cameras, leading to massive federal excavations in 2025.
The digital narrative is incredibly dense.
Right. They have a mountain of data pointing forcefully to a specific conclusion, yet they are confronted with a total, unyielding physical void.
The physical proof required to close the loop remains completely elusive.
It's an agonizing puzzle.
It is, and it fundamentally challenges our perception of modern surveillance. We operate under the assumption that our lives are meticulously mapped in server farms.
That we leave a trail with every click.
Exactly. The ultimate unsettling question this investigation forces us to ponder is this. As our physical existence becomes inextricably bound to this vast digital architecture, can a human being ever truly vanish without a trace? Or is the truth simply locked behind a single piece of encrypted data, a corrupted file, or an overwritten sector that we just haven't learned how to read yet?
Thanks for listening.